Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. And today, back for the second time, we have a previous guest who is an IT architect, a leadership specialist, and we like to consider him a Chasing Dreams podcast enthusiast. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Jared Churchman.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
What's up?
So, Justin, we have back for the first time a guest.
Yeah,
so this is the first time, aside from Shannon, who we mentioned before we started recording, who was kind of 2 consecutive episodes to kind of finish her story. This is the first guest that we've ever had back on a second time.
Yeah.
So, Jared, you must feel pretty special, I'm sure.
Oh, of course. Justin tells me I'm special all the time, but I don't think that's what it means.
Yeah, maybe a little bit different context. So we talked briefly, and I didn't really get into detail about it, and I am the furthest thing from a knowledgeable person when it comes to the fire department. You actually got a promotion. So what is your title now? And refresh us, what was your title previously there?
Previously, I was just had the rank of firefighter, and I was promoted to lieutenant since we last spoke.
Cool. Did I tell you that I went on my first fire call, or did Justin tell you that I went on my first fire call the other day?
Yes, I did hear about that.
So we actually didn't mention it on the show because we were getting ready to record, Justin and I. Was it last week?
It was last week.
I think it was last week. And right as we were literally seconds from recording, he got a call and we had to go to the scene where it was a non-urgent situation, I guess would be the correct term for it.
It was a non-emergent lift assist.
So. Non-emergent lift assist. There you go.
Yeah, when he told me that, I was disappointed because I'd always imagined what that would look like if it happened when you guys were recording, and I really wish that it was like a full send, like working structure fire, possible entrapment to because I would want to hear from Justin what it was like for you to ride in his truck when he's responding. Lights and sirens and traffic's moving and all that fun stuff.
To be fair, I probably would have just kept it recording if it was at that point. We would have just done the show live in pursuit of the fire.
And that's how you accidentally got sued by 911 or some other show on there. Live, what do they call it? Live Rescue.
Yeah, but I feel like when I have experiences like that, I don't know, maybe it sounds kind of corny, but I love doing things that I'm not used to or learning things that I don't know about, which is kind of counterintuitive to a conversation we had earlier where we said we don't like to learn stuff that's wasteful. You try to make it applicable. And that's actually kind of a cool conversation starter, I guess, was before we started recording, we talked about how I don't listen to music in the car as much anymore because one of the things that I've been doing is trying to put on podcasts or different informational videos or something that's going to benefit me. So I try not to make it something useless. Like the example that I used was like a circuit board and how that works. Like I'm the furthest thing from an electrical engineer and I know nothing about it, but I try to find things that are going to be useful to my craft. So, something very specific to like performance or physique enhancement or health and wellness or something of that sort instead of listening to music because you realize how much downtime you have in the car if you really pay close attention to it, and it's amazing how much of that can be wasted just zoning out and listening to music.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't listen to spoken word if I'm trying to think. It's like if I'm working, I can't listen to a podcast. I mean, it can be on and I can ignore it, but if I'm trying to get something out of it, cannot multitask at that level and I only recently learned that not everybody's like this, but I have the internal thought monologue. And it kind of blew my mind that not everybody does that. But if somebody's talking and I have a train of thought, I'm either thinking or I'm listening. I can't do both at the same time. So I'll listen to music if my brain's busy. But if my brain is kind of doing a mundane task, painting, labor, laying floor, then I can listen to spoken word and actually pick something up because my brain is, frankly, bored. Right. So I totally get that.
No, I'm kind of the same way. If I'm doing something like email exchange, which is, a frequent, seemingly mundane because I do it all the time, but it's really not because every email I send is for a specific reason and you're addressing specific issues with clients. So you have to be very measured in what you're putting out there. It's so hard for me to do it, even if the television's on or anything. Almost to the point where it's kind of weird that I have to work almost in complete silence when I do anything because I'm the same way, which is oddly enough, you mentioned that other people are like that. I feel like we're a rarity because it seems like more people are at least capable of multitasking. I don't know if the work quality is going to be as good, but people like to do it, whereas I have to kind of, just be immersed in what I'm doing and everything else external needs to be shut off. I can't deal with it.
and we don't have a Jamie to confirm this, but I'm fairly certain that there are studies that show there is no true multitasking. You're just switching, right?
Right, back and forth.
Right,
from
and I
one
mean,
task to another.
even computers on a fundamental level aren't really doing more than one thing at the same time. You might have several different pathways that you're taking to run these calculations, but truly doing two things at once isn't a thing.
Yeah.
And you're just switching between tasks. And like some people are better at getting in and out of tasks, and that's why they're better multitaskers, but really they're just switching. And the same studies, if I'm recalling correctly, again, I can't verify this off the top of my head, but the switching and they basically prove that on average people are less efficient when multitasking than not, because switching tasks, there's time coming in and out of those thought processes. People are better or worse at it, but it's definitely less efficient.
I'm going to assume that based on personal experience that can be said about long-term goal setting and long-term things too. It's like, Justin, you and I talk all the time, specifically to you, about how if you have a goal or something long-term that you want to accomplish, that other goals can kind of detract from that. And you kind of go back from, let's take fitness.
Right.
To be specific with what we typically talk about. Like with you, it was strength training. It was, generalized weight loss. It was endurance sports. And there's obviously going to be correlation with all that stuff. But with Justin, it was tough for us initially to navigate what he wanted to do because he wanted to do everything, which is good.
Yeah.
But when it's like, I know this is going to ruffle some feathers here, because there's definitely like a growing contingency of people in like the fitness industry that don't think you need to bulk or cut. They think that you can add lean tissue progressively and get where you want to go, which I do agree with to an extent. But it seems like, based on past experience, that the most effective way is to either bulk up and cut down, or cut down and bulk up. You have to do them separately versus trying to just pack on lean muscle, because the rate at which it's going to go is so slow, and you never know if you're optimizing how much muscle you can gain if your calories are somewhat restricted.
Wouldn't you have to have a starting point of being lean already?
It helps.
I mean, because can you put lean muscle under fat and it be lean muscle?
Yes, but it's going to be less visible.
Right.
So you're
not going to catch that appearance that you're looking for. So essentially, it's like a double negative, because now you have to cut to get the fat off so you can see what you have.
And plus, there's like little nuance that goes into it. Like if you're overweight and obese, your insulin sensitivity is going to be like remarkably low. So then you're not going to be utilizing food as much or as well as you should. So when you do bulk up, it's not going to be as effective, and it's probably going to get a lot of stored body fat versus stored glycogen. And again, there's like some nuance that goes into it. So regardless, I think it's best to kind of choose where you're headed and not pull yourself in different directions. And I'm sure
it's hard.
It is hard, yeah.
Hey, Justin, you remember when I started talking about Apple versus Microsoft operating systems, and you kind of glazed over and just started bobbing your head?
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. But picking up on the structures of what you're talking about, it sounds like it absolutely could be done, but instead of floating 1 point on a chart, you're floating 3, and you're trying to find a solution of equations, right?
Right.
Whereas, if you're picking one direction, it's pretty cut and dry what you need to do. And then you can go a different direction, it's pretty cut and dry what you need to do. But if you're trying to intersect, because you were talking about fat, bulk, and what was the third one? Lean muscle.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 different lines. You've got to find the perfect intersection, which is going to be completely different for every individual versus just having one.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff that you would do for each of those, it's almost like you create a paradox, because like a lot of the stuff is
counterproductive.
Yeah, for sure. Because when you're trying to add muscle tissue, you need a caloric. You don't need a caloric surplus necessarily that some studies will show, but it's obviously beneficial because you're trying to add as much size as possible. And then when you're trying to go into a fat loss phase, you need a caloric deficit. So less calories than you take in. And it's very hard, like you alluded to find that best fit line and try to balance them, because there's so many little details that you have to address versus, like you said, when you have one goal, there's not really many little details. You just need to look big picture versus trying to focus on the minutia. So for you, Justin, if you wanted to gain muscle, train for endurance sports, optimize your health, go into like a prolonged fat loss stage. Those things would all be possible, but there's so many other variables that you have to account for, things that you need to track versus just saying, if I'm just losing weight or fat, I need to be in a deficit, need to keep these macros and these micronutrients at about this intake and just go with it. It's just a lot simpler too.
Sure. I mean, you want to keep the mathematics simple because, like a single equation could have an infinite amount of solutions of a certain category, countably infinite, but that's way deep math. But once you start involving different sets of equations, I mean, even if you just look at it as like 3 different lines on a graph, those lines are infinite. I mean, you can describe what that line is, but there's infinite solutions along that line. And then you add another line. Those intersect, or they don't intersect at all. But let's just say that they do. There's one point where that intersects. And if you have 3 lines, those 3 lines may not intersect at all. But, you go from infinite solutions to an equation to 1. So not to say that it's impossible, but it's really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I think that that's kind of like a big issue that some people have. And we'll take this outside of the fitness industry. It's just goal setting in general, where you almost want to conquer the world, because usually with motivation comes like that vigor of I'm going to do everything, like whether it's a financial goal, a professional goal, a health goal, they want to do everything all at once. And I've noticed with myself that I need to focus on very specific things. And that's why, like Justin and I've talked on previous episodes about, I don't want to say being against, but to a degree being anti long-term, because I feel like
people get lost in the long term.
Yeah, and I'm one of them.
Yeah,
and it's very easy to not address the needs of the long term and the here and now because it is long term. So like the example that I've used in the past is I took some time off of competing in bodybuilding because I wanted to get better. And that was probably the worst thing for me to do. Probably beneficial from a health standpoint, but terrible from a progress standpoint, because I said to myself, I have all this time. Like, I'm not going to compete for 2 or 3 years now because I'm going to get better. So, like, I could not train as hard. And it was almost like at a subconscious level. Like, I would just, like, unknowingly tell myself, well, there's no sense of urgency with my training. There's no sense of urgency with my nutrition. So I would do things to the degree that, I would do what I was supposed to do most of the time, but just not with the degree that I was supposed to do them and with the consistency that I was supposed to do them. And then lo and behold, after several years, you don't make any progress. Whereas if I was to set a short-term goal of I need to gain this amount of weight by this time, or my lifts, these 3 lifts need to be at this weight, in a month from now or whatever, I feel like it would have been much more effective for me. And that doesn't change what the long-term goal is, but being focused on the short-term would have made it so much more productive versus me going for several years and then looking back in retrospect and saying, oh my gosh, I didn't accomplish anything in those 3 years. Right. What the heck was I doing?
And I think that like the psychology of the way our brains work, you have to spend like a certain amount of time kind of tricking yourself into doing things, right? So like, I feel like with goal setting, whether you start at the lofty goal or you start at the how am I going to tie my shoes goal, everything has to work towards the point, right? Mm-hmm. So if your short-term goals align with your long-term goals, you focus on the short-term, you're accidentally focusing on the long-term, right? Huh. And the same is to be said outside of goal setting or just thought processes. And as far as lifestyle change goes, and I'm not trying to say that I've done it or I'm really great at it. I'm working on it all the time, slowly, because I know if I do it too fast, then it's too much, and then I'll fall off of all the wagons, right? But if you focus really hard on changing one aspect of your life, and then you kind of onboard that as just how you do things.
Yeah.
Like that focus. So like, I don't have to focus on how to walk because I spent some time in my early years figuring that out, right? So if I just hyper focus on eating clean, maybe,
right,
and then that just becomes your life, then that's life now. I on board, and then I can go focus on cardio, and then I get used to doing cardio. I build up a certain amount of endurance,
right,
and I have a schedule. I do cardio so many times a week. I'm going to go do weight training. I feel like tricking yourself into onboarding things as your new normal with hyper focus is the better way to go.
It's kind of ironic that's a theme that we've talked about before. Is creating the new normal.
Yeah, coincidentally enough, you being the one exception to that, like on my end, where I've done, when I work with clients, generally the first step is always establish, habits. So for some people, when you go, well, most people, and even most is probably an understatement. Most people, when they start on a full diet plan, if it was someone who's never been on a structured nutrition plan before, inevitably they fail because of it's not because of a lack of motivation or willpower like some people would think. It's because it's not sustainable. So that sustainability could be because it's foods that they hate, so they don't have the willpower to continue to force them down. But ultimately it could be time or schedule. It could be a financial issue or a budget concern. It could be like lack of time to prepare the food, so they need to be quicker to prepare. But regardless, usually I start off people not with a full diet plan, but like these are the things that you need to be making a habit. Drink this much water per day, optimize these supplements every day, things that are easy to change and that anybody can do in a relatively short amount of time. And then after a couple weeks, it's like brushing your teeth or like you said, walking. You don't think about doing that every day. It just becomes habit. Drinking water suddenly becomes habit. Taking these supplements suddenly becomes habit. And then slowly by incrementally, adding these habits to someone, they're on a full nutrition plan without even being cognizant that they are, or without there ever being like a learning process. And the other thing that I think about with that too, that Jared, when you were talking, it just kind of clicked in my head is when you do things the right way in a certain area, I think that you then will succumb to doing things the right way in every area. So like, I always look at bodybuilding as kind of like a microcosm of life. Not that I try to get too philosophical with it, because fundamentally you're just lifting heavy things and putting heavy things down. It's not really, that much of a, I don't know. I don't think it's that motivational. Some people think that it is, but like for me, it's just going to the gym and lifting. But I think that I use that to kind of parallel what I do in life, because if you're a bodybuilder, you obviously have extreme attention to detail. Well, if you're a successful bodybuilder, you do. You have, a very good work ethic. You're very honed in on the need for consistency. So you have all these good qualities that if you transfer that to your job or to your family or to whatever you do, it's going to make you successful. So I think that focusing on, one specific goal, as long as it's beneficial to you, then the other goals, even the unrelated ones, are going to get a little bit easier down the road because of the habits that you form, I think.
I would have to agree with that, because like all the short-term goals that you and I have set for me over the last year and a half have led to me doing my own goals and like tackling things as trivial and as minor as raising chickens, or starting to keep it like not that we kept a dirty house, but keep a clean house, like laundry always done, dishes always done. Like it's just a part of the day.
Isn't it so much easier just to keep up with it?
Yeah,
that's what I've been trying to do in life, as well.
It's like emails, like we talked about before going on air.
Easy on the emails, because I'm not there yet.
Like I said, you just got you fix one thing at a time.
Baby steps. But no, it's like I wrote like while you guys were both talking about long-term and short-term goals, I kind of made a quick flow chart, and it's like long-term takes time and you're kind of relaxed. And then short-term goals are right now, and you're intense. You know what I mean? Because it's a goal that you can see. Like, I want to pick this pencil up. I just have to reach down and pick it up.
We as humans, our mind's eye is every bit of nearsighted. Right,
and it's like with the fire department, it's that too. Like it's a short-term goal to be able to ride on a fire truck with lights and sirens. And then you do that, and then the next goal is to now I want to become a certified firefighter. So then you have a whole line of goals that naturally occur to get to where you want to go.
Wouldn't it be sufficient to say then, at least to a degree, that despite humans' natural inclination to comfort, because we always want to be comfortable, which I think kind of restricts people from achieving what they want to achieve, but don't you think that some of the human psychology, and Jared, you'd be more of an expert on this than I am, don't you think that some of the human psychology of being in the here and now and wanting to focus on the immediate future would actually play into making people more successful at short-term goal settings if they harnessed it and directed it the right way?
Yeah, so I think there's value in going top down with it. And I picked up on one of those TED Talks I spoke about, like evolutionary biology is starting to quickly become something I feel like I need to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. Because, the study was actually about fairness with capuchin monkeys. But the things that people do in long-term goal setting all comes from the sense of community and working together, because and arguably that's why humans we're established the way that we are now, and we aren't just another large upright walking ape, right? Yeah. Because we started working together, we discovered farming, and then we had time to figure these things out, right? So I definitely think that you have to find the structure, and as long as you're working within that structure toward where you're headed, it's absolutely easier to go up and down the size and depth of the goal, right?
Right.
So like we understand how we play a role in, in society or at work or at home. And that like at home, your overarching goal is, keep a clean house, make this a family home, so on and so forth. And then you can take, like, is this best for my family to leave these dishes in the sink? No. Okay, well, let's do them. Once you have like the cosmic goal, right, you can break everything down into a smaller binary system, and then it's really easy to see that. And it's funny because the fairness podcast was really interesting because they actually saw that those capuchin monkeys were easily miffed at unfair reward practices, and then they related it to how a lot of the different protests and things that we see in society today are kind of fairness based, to where if you feel that there is inequality, like your biology is triggering those responses to unfairness. And I was like, wow, that's neat. Because I always say in my life, there are reasons that people do everything, whether it's environmental or whatever. Like almost nobody makes an original choice with no outside stimuli whatsoever. There are reasons for everything.
Right.
And it was neat to hear that like we're ingrained to speak up against injustice, but only if we're on the bad side of it. Was also proven in that study, so that's interesting. I really went down a different path there.
I think we always end up going down a rabbit hole. So
I feel like I'm a rabbit hole seeking missiles sometimes.
When you were talking there, I thought of a topic, the subtopic kind of, and it's not a new topic. It's something we talk about, like literally, I think on every single episode. But goal setting and doing everything for a reason. Being like focus driven and purpose driven for what we're doing comes back to time management. You know what I mean? Like when I was 526 pounds, I focused all my time on what my next meal was and what I was going to eat for the day, or what I was going to drink for the day, or how I was going to make myself feel comfortable for the day. Mm-hmm. And now that I have gotten some goals and achieved my goals to this point, I'm chasing them goals. But the time management that I've learned through like setting a goal and accomplishing it, and setting another goal and accomplishing it, and setting 3 goals and taking them one step at a time to get to them has built time management. So now I have like all this extra time. Like I'm reading, Nick Bare wrote a book called 25 Hours a Day. And it's pretty incredible. He's the owner of Bare Performance Nutrition. So it's a pretty cool idea where, obviously our clock has 24 hours in a day, but if you take all the time that you waste and put it into action, put it into a direction for whatever your goal is for that day or for that minute or for that hour of the day, we essentially can unlock so much more time out of your day. Because like I used to sleep the same amount of time as I do now, but it was broken up and was not in an optimal time range. So I would sleep right until I went to work. And now I just sleep a little earlier and I get up and go to the gym in the morning. So like I have unlocked 2 hours a day just because of the time I decided to go to bed.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I've kind of done something similar with my sleep patterns where I've gone to bed a little bit earlier and I'm losing out on a little bit of sleep, but and I shouldn't be saying this because I always preach to everybody about the importance of sleep and recovery and everything.
But you also preach about not just sleep and recovery, but risk versus reward, right?
Yeah. So the amount that I'm accomplishing by sleeping a little bit less is largely, beneficial for me. What I've been doing lately is I've been getting up at 3:30 in the morning. I prep my meals and my food and everything, and then I go to the gym, and I'm at the gym at 5, and then sometimes I'll work after 5 before school starts at 7:30 a.m., and then I'm at school. So me getting up earlier affords me the opportunity to do a lot more, because if I were to go to bed, if I was to sleep the same amount and I was to go to bed a little bit later, I wouldn't have done anything in that time frame from like the 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. time frame. So like it wouldn't have really done anything for me. Likewise, I like getting up earlier, because if I only had to be awake at 9, or if I only had to be awake at 10, I wouldn't have done anything with those hours that I'd just continue sleeping anyway.
Right.
So it'd be just wasted time for me.
It's like a habit for me now. Like today's my day off.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, all I have on the program for today is to do an hour and a half of cardio.
Yep.
So to get up, and this whole 5 o'clock in the morning recording session was my idea, because I'm like, dude, we could get so much more time today if we just go to bed like we were getting up for work.
Yeah. And if I were to sleep into 9 o'clock today, I wouldn't have done anything or benefited from it in any way. Absolutely. I would have gained 4 hours of sleep, but I would have lost 4 hours of work. So.
Right. 4 big hours of productivity, and like with how as busy as your schedule is, I really don't know how you do.
Well, it took a long time so that's a good talking point too, is like for me specifically, it took a long time for me to get to the point where I could handle that much, and it came incrementally. So like when I first started my transition into adulthood, like I had training experience and like a little bit of coaching experience as far as like helping people with their goals and like getting people ready for shows and stuff in like a less intensive role where I wasn't getting paid for it or like financially compensated or whatever. So into adulthood, I started teaching. And then, I started working at a gym on weekends and summers and stuff, to gain a little bit of income. And then that kind of accelerated, and you just add 1 or 2 clients at a time. And then someone needs help with their nutrition, so you kind of branch off into the online business. And then it was just progressively adding people. And as I'm adding clients, either in an in-person setting or in a virtual setting, it took like years for me to adjust my schedule, because the biggest thing for me actually was finding time for myself.
Right.
Because I wanted to help other people. And then there's obviously, financial incentive to help other people with what I do. So like it would be very easy for me to skip the gym or miss meals or, lose out on recovery and sleep, or it would be pretty easy, I'm sure, for most people to let other areas of their life start to kind of titrate down as far as how much focus you give to it, which then is going to lead that down a road of failure if you're not careful. So like people saying, oh, you do such a great job with time management with how busy you are, but like it's taken me a lot to kind of troubleshoot how to give value to everything that I do and still be able to add more progressively. Like I'm to the point now where I'm pretty much maxed out though. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I can add really any more clients unless I find a way to be more efficient. So that's where I've been lately.
Well, and there's a huge strain of maturity there to realize that you're maxed out. Like, you know what I mean? And here's a fun thought exercise. Take all of what your schedule looks like, your responsibility looks like, hand it to yourself 10 years ago. It's laughable, right?
Yeah.
At every point in my life, even like 2 or 3 years, just hand that schedule to the 3-year younger guy. That guy would laugh at you, right? And I think the key is the incremental change, like making tiny little changes and circling back to the onboarding the new normal, right? And that's how you get stuff done.
I think that guy would have to put down a lot of bush light before he could pick up my schedule.
I'm not exaggerating when I say like I couldn't have done this a month ago. Like every month, I think, and I guess that's a testament to me working pretty hard to establish efficiency in what I'm doing. But like if you gave me what I have now a month ago or 2 months ago, because I have the same client load as far as in-person people, I have the same client load as far as my virtual people where I work through their nutrition and like their online coaching. And then, wrestling practice just started. So, that, takes a big chunk out of my weekends because of tournaments and duels. And then you have practice every day for 2 hours. So there's another chunk of time that I'm losing that I didn't even realize that I had. But you find a way to be efficient. So one thing that I've done at the gym is with some of my athletes, I've consolidated some of my training. So what I've done is I've taken people that have like goals and similar like athletic items that they need to get better at, and I train those people together in like a small group setting. So like instead of having one solo, I do 2 or 3 at a time.
You know how I feel about group training too, man. It's I bet you your athletes that you're training in them small groups are benefiting more from the group because of the competitive nature, right? Because you have a whole range of abilities in each group, and I follow your stuff every day, so like I can see the growth from the ones that not to say they weren't as athletic, but the ones that were at a lower athletic standard than like say your upper level the girls.
Sarah and Sydney.
Yes, they're
my
savages.
twins. Yep.
Oh, I love them.
I'm sure there's like a Goldilocks zone with group size too.
Yes.
There is.
You can't have. I mean, because you get lost. You'll have kids get lost in 10 if you have 10 of them. You know what I mean? You're going to lose kids.
And that's the conversation that I have with parents when I do that, because I want parents to understand the benefits and the drawbacks to a group training session or a setting like that. Because like Justin alluded to, there's going to be a huge uptick in competitive level just because athletes are athletes at heart. So they want to compete. They don't want to. It's easy to get lazy when it's just you versus when you have other people. You know, your work ethic is going to be accelerated a little bit just because of a sense of awareness of other people are with you. But then, like you also said, there's that very fine line, Jared, between what's too much and what's enough. Because the one thing that I think of is Coach Bo Pelini, who's the defensive coordinator for LSU and was previously the head coach at Youngstown State. He always has a say. He says, eyes on the guys. So like you want as many eyes in coaching as you can on your players to make sure that people are doing what they need to do the way they need to do it. If you have too many people in a group setting, then that takes away from, quote, eyes on the guys. So you're not getting as specific with attention to detail. You can't give immediate feedback and you miss reps. Like if we're doing a speed drill and I have 10 people going at once, I can only watch one person. So 10% of the drill work you do, you're getting feedback on. If I have 3 people, that's 33% of the drills that we do that you're getting feedback on. So I think that that 3 to 5 range is kind of ideal. What would be ideal is to be able to do, 2 or 3 every single time, but there's got to be give and take there.
Now, and would you say there were diminishing returns with hyper-focus, like micromanaging?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I always try to give feedback after everything to people, and I think that's kind of like, to hint on the conversation we spoke on episode 36 with you, Jared, was about leadership. Is one of the things that's important is to give very specific feedback pretty frequently, but it needs to be quickly digestible. So when I have an athlete, if they're doing a drill, as long as something's not like inherently wrong with the way that they're doing it, like way off, that's like needs addressed, I won't say anything. I'll say, hey, let's try to, change hip position just a little bit on here, or like very brief fixes. But then if something's completely off, I'll wait till after to say, hey, when we were doing this drill, I noticed with your landing mechanics that we're getting some like knee cave because of this or that. We need to fix this. And you go into a lot more detail when they have the time to digest it, because I think that they could be overloaded mentally. And if you're thinking, it's another football analogy, if you're thinking, you're not playing. Like you want defenses or offenses to play fast. And if kids are trying to think their way through scheme, they're not going to be able to play fast, which is going to hurt them. So I definitely think that that's, worth mentioning.
That's like the one thing I learned, because I do a lot of the reading and stuff like you guys talk about in the car or in my big truck at work. So I listen to a lot of books and a lot of podcasts. And the one thing I learned is, and a lot of my stuff's like military focus, is because I'm fascinated with people that volunteer their time for the greater good.
That's why you always send me times of meetup in military time, and I have to count on my fingers to figure out what time he means.
I'm like that because I work in a global environment, and one less thing to have to convert is better.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the one thing I learned is there's no medicine in a gunfight. So that's kind of the same thing. You don't want to take. So you're focused on executing this exercise or this thing, whatever it is you're doing. If it's your fitness, or if you're at work and you're in the middle of your day and you see that your employee or your student or your athlete is making a mistake, like you said, as long as it's not detrimental, they're not going to get hurt. They're not going to, quote unquote, waste the workout. They're not wasting your time or your money. Wait until the end of the day when the gunfight's over, and then we'll fix the problem. So we'll address the issue at hand, and then give them, because like you said with leadership, you have to give the easily digestible information, but you also have to give a solution or support a solution that they give.
Yeah,
and mistakes don't always necessarily need corrected.
Right.
Like the semantics of the word mistake means it almost implies that you shouldn't have done it, you did it anyway.
Right.
Or it was just a heat of the moment, you had left or right, and you're like, well, it should have gone right. So kind of as a leader sitting on something like that, past your emotional reaction and really thinking about it, like you may not want to say something where if you're right on top of somebody always, like if I screw up a lot of the time, I know I screwed up, you know what I mean? So as a leader, letting yourself digest that to the next day, to practice the next day, or, when we're sitting around the picnic table 2 hours after the fire, you're going to know as a leader if it's really worth having that discussion or if you're going to be causing more harm than good. And then you can even file that away. Is this a pattern? Do I need to address this? Because one-off little tiny things that people are aware of. I tell you, when I make a silly mistake, if I don't immediately cop to it and somebody busts me out on it before, it makes me feel terrible because I already feel bad about it, right?
Right.
So if I don't have the chance to cop to something and somebody comes down my throat about something that I already knew about, it feels awful. So like as a leader, you don't want to make somebody feel like that.
Right. That's why I think why we
so
wait.
Just sitting on it for sure is definitely,
right.
I think, a good strategy.
Yeah, because it gives you a time to like think about what you're gonna say. Because if you are talking to your fellow subordinate, whatever, right? You don't have to have as much thought into what you say. But when you're talking essentially down to somebody below you, not down to them, but they're on the ladder, they're
down
lower,
the chain of command.
Yeah, they're down lower than you. They look up to you. So what you say means more, and you need to make sure that what you're saying is effective and not counterintuitive. You're not busting them down, so to speak.
And there's something very specific that I have as far as like a pet peeve with that. And I want to touch on that a little bit later because right now we're going to go to commercial break. So when we come back, I want to ask you guys a question, get your thoughts on it. As listeners of the Chasing Dreams podcast, we know that you demand the highest quality at all times. If you're interested in quality, look no further than Beast Mode Baking. Beast Mode Baking aims to bring the highest quality, creative, and of course delicious baked goods to your home with nationwide shipping. All orders need to be pre-ordered to ensure they're packed fresh and shipped out to you as soon as possible. Beast Mode Baking offers a flat rate of $15 for shipping due to the size and weight of the cookies and doughs. So if you're interested in Beast Mode Baking, please contact CEO Shannon Knorr. That's at SKNORR13 on Instagram and order your delicious baked goods today because every time you support them, you're supporting the podcast as well. And welcome back from our commercial break. So one thing that I wanted to touch on before we went to our break was I mentioned that I have a pet peeve, and it comes specifically to giving people feedback. I've coached a lot of sports for what I consider to be a long time, at least, the entirety of my adulthood so far. And one of the things that bothers me, and I know that I do it too, but I'm trying to get away from doing it as much as possible, is when you give athletes, and this doesn't necessarily need to be tailored to athletes. This can be in any realm that you're in a workforce and whatever, in a social setting. I don't like when coaches give a ton of feedback on obvious things, especially, Jared, like you mentioned, in the wake of a perceived failure. So if a football player is, scrimmaging and drops a pass, and the coach screams at him, you got to catch that, you got to catch that. And it's just, inundating him with the same
stuff. The guy knows that he should have caught it.
Yeah, you're not giving him anything valuable
right.
to change. Are you changing hand position? Are you changing where his eyes are? Was he looking upfield too soon? Was his route not crisp enough to where he was breaking to a point where the ball would have been more catchable for him so he could have got hands-on better? Like, you have to give something specific and valuable to him instead of just screaming at him to catch the pass.
Present a solution instead of just highlighting the problem.
Exactly, because then you tap into, like, the mental side of things where the kid's already down on himself because he knows that he drops the pass. And I'm guilty of that too, because it's an emotional response. Is when somebody doesn't do something that you expect them to do the way that you expect them to do it. It's, even leaders, good leaders can do that on occasion where they say, hey, this wasn't done the way I told you to do it. Catch the football, whatever it is. And that bothers me when I see other people do it. And so I've tried to get away from that as much as I possibly can myself. And if I do highlight something immediately, in the wake of a perceived failure, is I try to give feedback on how to correct it. Like, hey, you didn't catch that football. You're going to catch the football, probably better if you do this. And just try to give something specific that they can change versus just continuing to highlight the problem. So that's something that I always see, and it's bothersome to me, despite the fact that I do it as well.
Right. Outside of, like you said, outside of athletics, outside of, sports, that's a thing too, because like you said, it's an emotional response. I was talking to one of our longtime listeners the other day, and she was just venting and was telling me how she was gonna respond to an issue, and I was like, well, like Charlie was talking about last week, or I can't remember what episode it was that I was referencing, but is that the right now response? Is that the Band-Aid just got tore off? Ow, that hurt. This is my response? Or is this you thinking about what you want to talk about? And she was like, okay, so it's definitely not an emotional response. Okay, so then, and it literally helped her change and make her decision differently, which I thought was really cool, because like we talk about it, but I've never seen it practically done outside of me doing it.
Oh yeah, the mistake that people make is they take their initial uncontrollable biochemical reaction to something, and then after that has passed, it's not a very long amount of time. I don't remember the metrics. It's less than a minute, maybe 30 seconds at most. But after that time has passed, they built their entire thought structure off of that knee-jerk reaction, right? So everything they do is based off of emotion that's already gone. And if you, just like you did, it just as simply says, is this based off of how you felt then or what you actually want to do now?
Right.
That's enough to be like, you know what? Because how many people actually stay mad that long? Unless you are connecting your thoughts to the original emotion,
right,
which drums up the emotion, and then you've snowballed into an angry person.
And Justin and I have talked about that, about how I've tried to very, very conscientiously tap into that. So if I have something that makes me mad, the example that we used on previous episodes where it's something driving, like, someone cuts me off or whatever, usually I would stay mad for the entirety of my car ride after that. No matter how long it is, it could be a 2-hour drive, and I'm still going to stay angry about that incident, and I'm going to fester on it and just have it in the back of my head. Whereas now, when something happens, I immediately try to avoid or get out of the knee-jerk reaction. So I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm angry right now because this guy gave me the finger, but I'm trying to get out of it. There's no sense in me getting mad. So I do everything I can to very quickly say there's no sense in getting mad because anger's not going to make this any better. And then it's amazing what you can actually do when you recognize, like you said, Jared, that biochemical response is, 10, 20, 30, 40 seconds. And then as Dr. Ryan said on a previous episode, anything after that is you specifically choosing to stay in that emotion. You're choosing to be angry.
I knew it came from somewhere.
So
but yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Your emotions come from stimulus or from thoughts, right? There's only two things that really, you know what I mean?
Right.
Your thoughts, memories, whatever. You can control your thoughts. You cannot control the stimulus. So work in the space you can control.
Absolutely. That's. I think that's the most fundamental advice for anything, is because we can only work in the space that you can control. I tell my wife that. I tell my coworkers that all the time. Because people will worry about, we'll get these big jobs at work where they look complicated because of where they are, or it's something that these particular newer employees have never seen because they're new and we just haven't been here long enough, been in that space. And everybody gets paranoid and panicky. And it's like, relax. You can drive the truck, right? You know how to put water on it. You know how to put water off of it. So control those three things, and the job goes smoothly. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think that can be broken down to diet. That can be broken down to life skills in general, like just like time management, like just breaking everything down into the things that you can control, and the other stuff will shake themselves out and give you enough time to learn how to control them.
And that works just great, but let's tie in, I believe it was last week's podcast when we were talking about mental illness.
Yeah.
So here, let's throw this in there. So I have generalized anxiety disorder. So basically that means that I get anxious or I'll have a panic attack or, for no reason most of the time because, it's a dysfunction, right? But the reactions that I can't control aren't 30 seconds sometimes. Sometimes they are 30 minutes. Sometimes they're 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
So once you've established that framework, you have to realize that somebody who's depressed, they may have a 30-day reaction to something.
True. I mean, that's the whole reason why we had that whole conversation last week about mental health and the importance that the people that don't struggle with mental health play in that. Like, we can't just be the people that live in this space, right? Because I don't struggle so much with mental health issues. Like, I mean, obviously some depression issues just because of what I allowed myself to get to at one point in life and the obvious, but on the day-to-day, I don't struggle with it. So I make it a point to go out of my way to talk to the people that I know struggle or the people that I sense might have an issue or somebody that doesn't get talked to all the time, like as a friend.
Well, you have so much self-awareness with it, and awareness of other people's perspective. So I go back to talking about giving advice or giving feedback to people that they already know, telling the athlete, hey, you got to catch the football. It's the same thing can be said about, mental health is when people go into, a depressed state. And I'm not just talking like, oh, I'm down or, I'm just not, having a great time with my life right now. I'm talking true, clinical depression. When people are in that, oftentimes the advice they give is you just need to think positively, look on the bright side, do all these things. It's
if you want to increase your chances of being murdered, tell somebody to cheer up that has clinical depression.
Right? Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of just being in a good mood?
Right.
Mental health is incredibly interesting to me, one, because it obviously directly affects me because I have issues, but the interesting thing about mental health when you look at it scientifically is that, the primary means of treating these issues are, with pharmaceuticals and therapy. Now, the therapy works for mental health to some degree because the problem with your brain can control itself to some degree. Now, these reactions are usually like super id type reactions, like past your conscious mind, but your conscious mind can't control some things, right? So, like, imagine if it was the same way for every system in the body, like say you have a heart murmur and then like your heart could just think, I need to stop kind of murmuring, come on guys, let's not murmur no more. Like, can you imagine talking your heart into not having a murmur? That's what's kind of how mental health works, right?
Right.
Now, what is in the time that we are living today, the brain and the nervous system is so complicated that there may be a time that whatever I was born with, and I believe there's a huge genetic component because I saw traces of anxiety disorder in my father, and being a baby boomer with way more stigma overhead, he was completely and entirely never treated it. But it was like wildly obvious that he had the same issues that I have. But there will be a time, perhaps, that you can look at mental health and that gets a physiological problem. They could go in and just zap this nerve and anxiety disorder is gone, right? Because there's a lot of thoughts where anxiety disorder is a vagal nerve dysfunction. Because I have found that like heartburn will trigger anxiety, one, because I'll feel chest pain and like, I'm dying, gloom and doom, right? But also because that nerve controls your digestive tract. So when I have an anxiety attack, I have digestion issues. And if I have digestion issues, it can bring on an anxiety attack. So there might be a time where like some fancy little micro robot can get injected, goes, finds in my spine, zaps a nerve, hops right out, and we're done,
Yeah, I like that. I like the thought of that. That'd be ideal, right?
Yeah. But we are nowhere near that because it's way too complicated.
Where are we?
And if we are, it's because the government's hiding it or we stole it from aliens anyway.
One of the things that I wanted to mention too, and this kind of diverts back to a previous conversation. I don't want to get too far off the topic and kind of bounce around a lot, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Earlier in our episode, Jared, you mentioned going top down with goal setting and kind of having fluidity between the two, where you kind of go back and forth between them. And I kind of put this on paper just because it sounded good in my head initially. And I wanted to read it and get your guys' thoughts on this. And I can speak to it first because, like I said, I'm the one who put it down. But immediately this popped in my mind when you went on that spiel about being able to fluidly move between the top and the down, top being long-term goal setting and down being the short-term goal setting. I wrote down, I said, use the long to determine the short and use the short to achieve the long. So going back in that, you use your long-term goals to determine what your short, milestones are going to be. So if the long-term goal is me stepping on a bodybuilding stage, here are the short-term markers or like the little stepping stones that I need to get to the other side of the river. So I'm going to map out all these. Well, then I'm going to use those little stepping stones to eventually achieve what the long-term goal is. And I think that when you look at it that way, it's probably going to be pretty beneficial to you. If you look at, okay, this is what I need to, this is my ultimate goal. And I'm going to determine what my short-term goals are off of that. And then I'm going to use those short-term goals to eventually work their way back to what that long-term goal is. So I thought that it was at least in my head, it sounded like a pretty succinct way and, digestible way to put that. Use the long to determine the short and the short to achieve the long.
I'm excited to hear what Jared has to say about that because, obviously we talk about this stuff a lot on and off air.
So, yes, absolutely. So the loftier a goal, the more abstract it becomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys, I know you've heard of him, Justin, because I've been shoving him down your throat since we met, but Simon Sinek has a lot of really good, and it's business focused, but his paradigms, like Start With Why, was one of his books. So the most successful companies in the world are ones that have a solid why, that people buy into the why. And Apple was one of the prime examples of that, right? So like they have a thing, like you just subscribe to what Apple does, right? People that like Apple products buy Apple products. It doesn't even matter if they aren't exactly the best phone or laptop on the market at the time. You're going to buy it because it's Apple and you know what you're getting, and you're like it's a status thing.
It's a quality thing.
In some cases, yes, but it doesn't matter because Apple could ship a dud and everybody would still be lining up to buy them.
Once you've
because
established,
people subscribe to their why.
I got you. I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think once you establish the quality too, at one point in time, then the quality can diminish, but it's still going to have that resounding effect where people still assume that it's quality.
Right. Even if they do stumble, if you're not going to the stuff at the bottom, the what's don't matter nearly as much. If you bought into the top of the why, it doesn't matter. Like the fire department, if you just showed up, it's like, today I feel like fighting a fire. If you subscribe to the stuff at the bottom, it's incredibly hard to overcome problems, right?
Right.
So, it's not hard for a fire department to find their why, right? We're here to save lives, protect property, help people in need. If you truly subscribe to that and you're here for that reason, then everything else is just working toward that. And if it's not, it's easy to dismiss. If you're here for selfish gain, you're here for a T-shirt, it don't work out, right?
Right.
Because you haven't found that why.
And Justin, I'm sorry to interrupt there. I have to interject this because how many times do you and I talk about specific to fitness that people fail because they neglect identifying what their why is? If you say, I want to get in shape, okay, well, you need to establish a why first. Are you getting in shape? It can be selfish reasons, but you have to first identify why with solid conviction. Otherwise, you're going to deviate from it.
I cannot explain the amount of times that I explained finding your why to people at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night because it was a long day and I pushed my cardio back. And I'm on the phone with Jared or DJ or, a numerous different amount of people that I talk to on a daily basis, right? At 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
And we're rambling about, why are you out there? It's snowing, dude. And what are you doing? I'm like,
why are you going to the gym at 3 a.m?
Why? Exactly. Yeah, I get this why all the time. And I say, why not? That is my why. Because I have to. If I don't go to the gym, the rest of my day is not going to be right. If I don't do these burpees today, the rest of my day is a lie. Because I base my day off of a set of morals and a set of standards. Mm-hmm. That is my why. What I do is my why. So like, I just can't, like the why thing. You hear it all the time now today. Like people talk about find your why, but are they really finding their why? Or are they just
and
telling
that's why
people
I
to find
mentioned
their
Simon Sinek, because you guys said a lot of the same things with or without his influence.
Right.
I mean, and his revelations were kind of applying that to business, but you pick up a lot of good stuff along those ways.
I found that
those lines.
I found that there's not a whole lot. Success doesn't have a whole lot of. I think that the word is binary. Success does not have a whole lot of binary focus. So it's not just business. It's not just relationship. It's not just fitness. It's not just work. You know what I mean? It's success. Successful people are successful at a wide area of things because they live in the successful moment.
Yeah, I think it goes back to like skill set development that we talked about earlier. Is the skills are secondary to the habits.
Right.
So if you form good habits of waking up early, being organized, working hard, just vague general terms like that, that's going to carry over into everything. If you're a hard worker, it's going to help you in business. It's going to help you with your family. It's going to help you in relationships. It's going to help you in sports. It's going to help you in pretty much every avenue. I don't know anybody that can say with, validation that something they want to do isn't going to require hard work if they want to do it at a high level.
Right. And if anybody thinks that what they're going to get is going to be just handed to them and it's not going to require hard work, I don't even want it.
The funny thing is, it's funny you say that because this was a point that I wrote down like 45 minutes ago. But bodybuilding and endurance type races, like those pursuits in and of themselves are elite. Now, within that space, you can become an elite endurance athlete or an elite bodybuilder. But let's just make an analogy here, right? So if I was a bodybuilder in my 20s and then like in my 40s, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to a competition this weekend. You can't do that, right? Just to participate, you have to be elite versus the rest of the population. Now, whereas let's say I ran track in high school. I could go for a jog or whatever, but to actually go to a track meet and compete,
right.
I'm not going to be able to. You can't finish an endurance race. I misspoke a little bit. I can't go run 3 miles if I've not run in 10 years.
Yeah. You might be able to, but it would be, it could be detrimental to your physical health.
But, I haven't picked up a basketball in how long, but I could go play basketball.
Right.
I can't walk up on the stage and be a bodybuilder right now.
Right.
I've always hated that.
To even participate.
I've hated that about bodybuilding because I love it so much, and I've had this discussion like innumerable times at the gym. Because the one that I always reference is powerlifting. Powerlifting you can go do. You just have to bench, squat, and deadlift. Actually, squat, bench, deadlift in that order. But it's 3 main lifts, and you can go do them at any time. Now, you may not be peaking for the event. And I'm not undermining powerlifting at all, but anybody can do it at any time.
May not be great,
yeah,
but you could functionally do it.
Sure. Whereas with bodybuilding, you have to prepare for months and months and months just to do it. It's not something that you can do with regularity, which I hate about it.
Stage lean is not something you can just stay.
Yeah, because I want to do it as often as I can, but I'm restricted into small windows of time with large gaps in between in order to do it as much as I want.
And endurance athleticism is another thing. I feel like off the street, if you could run a marathon and not die, that would be impressive. Like you have to train to be able to do something like that safely.
Yeah, and if you say you don't train,
the guy who didn't train for it, that they named it after, literally died after he did it. So right. that's a whole other kind of crazy that I don't understand.
It's definitely
this guy died doing this. Let's do this every year for fun. Right.
I think it's very interesting how your perception of elite changes then. Because for me, talking to bodybuilding, when I get ready for a show and I start to diet, and people have made comments before about, when I say I'm losing fat or I'm preparing for a show, they say, how much leaner are you going to get? Can you even get any leaner? Like they don't understand how large of steps you need to take between levels of this. Like when you look lean and you have abs, people are like, oh, that guy's shredded. Mm-hmm. Like Justin said earlier, stage lean and lean are not the same thing. I mean, stage lean is where you're walking around the house in bare feet and your feet start to bleed because there's no fat deposits or, fat tissue on the bottom of your feet. Or when you go and sit down on the toilet, it hurts because there's no cushion or no fat there and you have striated glutes. Like that's different than me walking around with a six pack. So my definition of elite is like when you look at yourself, I don't want to say disgust because it's not like you don't like the way you look, but you know where you've been in the past, if you see where you are now and you know that you're so far from that. Whereas most people, it seems like your understanding of elite compared to the general population gets clouded.
Oh, for sure.
Because you're in it so much.
And like it's hard to see the forest through all the trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you being able to compete within 6 months on a stage, you are already in the top 0.1% in the general population right off the rip. You can almost guarantee it. Maybe not the exact numbers, but top 1.5% or whatever. But like you are an elite human in that space, and then once you're in that space, then obviously you may feel like you're looking up at giants still, but just random Joe off the street, like
like when I went to your show,
mm-hmm.
I imagine that all of the competitors there look around and they don't see the crazy amount of like the amazing.
Yeah.
But as for me, at 400 pounds, and I had lost a lot of weight at the time, but it was still amazing because I was like look at the sheer volume of people that was able to get stage lean.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that there's that many people in this sport.
And can you imagine somebody from the outside being a judge? It would all look the same?
Right.
Yeah.
All these dudes are ripped and shredded. You'll all win.
Right. I imagine the judging's hard.
It is, but it's just immersion. When you're immersed in it for so long, you know exactly what to look for.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be like driving a truck or being a firefighter. If you threw me in it right now, I have no idea what to do about anything. I don't even know how to turn a truck on. But, once you've done it for some time, it almost becomes habitual and you don't think about it. Like I can look at a lineup full of bodybuilders and tell you first, second, third, fourth, fifth, just like that. And I can digest it and itemize it a little bit for people to better understand. But part of it's also like a trained type of thing. Like you have a trained eye for it. See, it comes.
Yeah.
But it is difficult. It would be difficult for a lay person, just like, someone off the streets to go and they wouldn't be able to do it because like Jared said, I get that a lot. It's like when I post like a picture of like a stage where there's multiple competitors, they say, you guys all look great. How do you determine who wins? You guys all look the same. Well, there's very specific things that come across as trivial. And maybe they are trivial, but they make a big difference.
And I think that the maturity of the sport has a lot to do with it too, right? I feel like when they first started doing that, it was probably a lot clearer.
Yeah.
But it's just like every other sport, like the bar is raised over time. Like you imagine what, you can like use a more common analogy. You imagine what like the NFL, like the highest level of football will be like in 100 years.
Yeah.
What was it like 100 years ago?
Right.
Like dudes were out there just, high formation, right up the middle every play, But like, can you imagine like those guys, 1918 Hall of Famers, like show them what's going on right now?
Well, think about the unbelievable amount of technology that we have. And with, helmet improvements and safety protocols and everything that we do is aimed at mitigating the risk for concussions, right? And people say, oh, well, back then, we just shook it off and you got your bell rung and you're dizzy, you went right back out and played. So I think there is something to be said about awareness. But I think that part of the larger issue is despite all these technological advancements, concussions are on the rise. And I don't think it's predicated on just we're more aware of it. I think a large part has to do with the fact that you have guys that are 6'5", 250 running 4.7, 4.6 40s. And they're colliding with each other.
Okay, people are quantifiably larger and stronger as time goes on. Like dietary improvements, as the science of diets improve, the science of everything improves, so that you are producing more and more impressive humans, right? And more focus on things, more and more popularity on things. Like people are, there are some places you would get a football before you got a bottle.
Right.
Back in 1918, for whatever reason, that was my random year today. Not so much. They were just like, yeah, we're bored. Let's go play football.
Yeah.
Well,
so even like in the
things just
NFL,
keep going.
at like the elite level, like you see, different pictures. Like I forget, I can't remember. I want to say it was potentially Joe Namath. I could be wrong. I'm sure that people listening to this know who it is. I think it was Joe Namath. There was a picture of him at halftime of the Super Bowl, and he's sitting in a fold-up chair like we're sitting in right now in the middle of the locker room, and he's got an open beer next to him, and he's smoking a cigarette. And this is a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Athletes don't even look like athletes.
Yeah.
30 or 40 years back. And that's crazy. And, like, where is it going from here?
Hey, who knows? The sky's the limit, really, with like, technology and the way,
And once humans can't get any more elite, then we're just going to have football robots.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the nerds are going to take over. It'll be like playing Madden professionally, watching the robots go.
They already do that. Play Madden, not with the robots.
No, but esports are a thing. But can you imagine you get to the point where, like, nobody wants to watch humans play football?
No, I don't want to.
See, these are the kind of things that I think about when I get bored.
Yeah, you're much more of a rabbit hole guy than we are, which is saying a lot.
Yeah.
Sci-fi does that to you, man, because you start to realize the possibilities really are endless, and it's fun to have your own little thought experiments.
Right.
I think that's a sign of intelligence, though, is just being able to like look at different scenarios, and I don't want to say daydream because that kind of underplays it, but think these things through in your head with that sort of stuff. I think just an overreaching statement would be that generalized intelligence comes in rabbit hole form.
So I don't know, is this a term? So some people learn hands-on, right? Some people learn by reading.
Yep.
I am like, I do this thing where, like, if you say anything, like throwing a word out there, it doesn't matter. When you say Redcon One, I start thinking about Redcon One products, Aaron Singerman, all the big name guys, and so what I've been calling it is I'm like a visualizer. So like anything that somebody's talking about, when you start talking about the monkeys, I go back to a story that I learned a long time ago where, and I don't want to tell the whole story because it's long and drawn out, but basically they put a bunch of monkeys in a room with a rope and a bundle of bananas. The monkeys go up. As soon as they touch the bananas, they blast them off, and then they systematically replace all the monkeys one by one by one by one until there's no monkeys that have ever seen the water, but they keep tearing each other down. When you started talking about monkeys, my brain visualized monkeys doing that. I don't know why. I don't even know if that was what they were talking about in your TED Talk.
Similarly, yes. And it's funny, like any study with any primate, you can immediately, like black and white, cast it against anything going on in society.
Yeah.
Like we are doing this stuff because of biology.
Right. So is that a thing though? Like, do people do that? Is that a way people learn? Because like when I've read like Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, I've read it like 3 times, and I become completely and totally immersed in the book because I'm like visualizing exactly what he's saying.
In the education paradigm, you get taught about different learning profiles of kids. So you need to be able to target your audience effectively. And your audience isn't classifiable just by age or grade level. It's by the individual. So you have like auditory learners who learn best when they hear things, visual learners who learn best when they see things, kinesthetic learners who learn best when they're doing hands-on. I think that one of the ways to strengthen, retention or understanding of something is relativity. Like kids need to make something relative or relatable to themselves in order to understand it and be able to process it a little bit. So I think that that's kind of human nature, is when you hear these buzzwords or you think about things, you're trying to understand it better. So I think that the immediate response is try to relate it to something that I already know or that I already understand quite, so I can conceptualize it more effectively.
I got you.
I don't mean to bust on the education system in general with the teacher in the room, but doubling back real quick, people do learn like that because, believe it or not, you are people.
Right.
So if you learn that way, I'm sure you're not a snowflake, right? There's got to be at least one other guy in the world that thinks the same way you do, right?
Yeah.
There's enough of them, right? So, and there are so many different types of intelligences, like spatial intelligence, any number of different intelligences, because like you were an intelligent person, but you get in an education system that is based on one set of requirements and not necessarily one set of learning styles and teaching to kids different ways, but you are essentially coming up with a list of crap that every single human that comes through the system has to know. But not everybody is really even capable of knowing it on that level.
Or needing to know it.
Right. Yeah. Like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Thank you. How do I pay taxes? You know what I'm
Why
saying?
do I pay taxes?
What is credit? That, like, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, we have failed in so many different ways. Instead of developing the person to be their best self, we are developing them just like factories, stamping them out every single same thing. Now, I'm not saying that it's not getting better, because it is. You are seeing schools have a lot of specialized niche programs where kids can get into stuff that isn't necessarily traditionally academic. And it's always kind of been present with something like woodshop. You don't look at that as an academic pursuit, but there are so many more different things the bigger the school, and unfortunately, the more money said school has, you're allowed to develop these kids this way. But you still can't graduate high school if you can't remember the mitochondria isn't the powerhouse of the cell. Now, unless you are actually a biologist, why do you need to know that?
Yeah, there's really limited functional application to the things that you learn.
A lot of it.
And I think that the good teachers are able to teach those things, put them in the proper context, and then when you're teaching those things, because really your hands are tied to a degree, because these are the standards that I have to teach. These are the things that are being tested on. These are what I'm mandated to give you this information. But I think that an effective teacher can look at those and teach them in a way that develops the skills that they need to learn the other stuff too. So like, if you have to teach them facts about cellular biology, just to go off the example you had, when you're giving them this information, try to find ways that you can instill or engender problem solving.
Yeah.
Do group projects or discovery learning where they can learn interaction with other kids and group work and cooperation. You try to instill as much of those other things that you can while still giving the context that you're, quote, supposed to be giving them, which is hard to do, and it takes experience.
It is. I feel like that educators, and my experience, most of them, I had good teachers and I had bad teachers, but most of them got lost in the what's and they lost their why. Mm-hmm. Because you were very, very correct. The value in learning these facts and figures in times and places isn't so that you know those necessarily, but it's to learn how to do it. Like math. Every time I see somebody post, like, when am I ever going to use algebra? First of all, I'm about to flip the table, because there are tons of stuff you use algebra. You don't even know you're using algebra, right? And two, that's critical thinking, problem solving, analytical thinking, building those skills, right? It's not just adding and subtracting. I can use my calculator. But like actually doing algebra and solving equations, that's building logical thinking and structures. And like everything is a logical structure. But you're right. That stuff gets lost. And, if you lose the why, then the what's become trivial.
I think you alluded to a small group of people, unfortunately, of good teachers.
Right? In my experience, yes.
I've known a couple, and I've had a couple. So I've never had Coach D as a teacher, but I can tell that Coach D is a good teacher just by the way he explains how he'll jump on his desk or he gets real animated.
When you first mentioned that several episodes back, I immediately went to that Robin Williams movie. What was that called? Where he was teaching at the all boys school. He was teaching poetry completely against. Gosh, I wish I could. Where's Jamie? Jamie, look that up for me.
It wasn't Flubber, was it?
No, he was a teacher at a private high school for boys. Oh shoot! But it was centered around poetry, and it was forbidden poetry and then Dead Poet Society. That's what it was called. If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it, because immediately when you said he jumped up on your desk, I thought of this movie. Definitely need to watch it. But that engaging the kids in that type of way, it has got to be massively effective instead of a guy that's just up there in a shirt and tie for the paycheck.
Right.
It's like the last profession you want a guy there for a paycheck, right?
Right, exactly. The side topic, jumping on the desk, made me visualize when we were in the complex doing box jumps.
Yeah. I was like,
but
that's a skill.
What I was saying is I've known a couple really good teachers, and I've had a couple really good teachers, Mr. Schilling and Mr. Jones, who actually teaches with you. Mm-hmm. Were two of my most incredible teachers. Their biggest impact on my life in school, and I couldn't even tell you what subjects they were teaching me at the time. But the care for their craft and the care for the students, not that they were the nicest people always, right? Mm-hmm. But the demand for discipline, the demand for you to pay attention and learn, and then also the compassion for when you struggled in a certain area. So like that's when I say like there's awesome teachers out there, and then there's some, like you said, they're just there for a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
I mean, it's like anything else in life. The value of a person is more about what they leave behind than what they do in the moment.
right, exactly.
So like if I mean, I haven't thought about it lately, and I don't want to like misspeak or anything, so I'm not going to get specific. But the best teachers that I had, like you said, no clue what they taught. You know, you don't have to remember the lasting impressions or things that mold who you are as a person for life. It has nothing to do with y equals mx plus b, but I still remember it. You know, you pick up on the things that they mold you beyond the actual subject matter.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that can be said about all professions. You know, you have good people, not good people, but effective. Let's use that word. Effective people in all areas of life and all walks of life. And I wonder too, part of me wonders if the effectiveness of somebody, like a teacher, is relative to, you know, so for example, like, I don't know how I want to word this. If you have a teacher that you think is a good teacher, an effective teacher, there may be several students in that class that think the opposite. And then likewise, you may have another teacher that those people think was very effective and understanding and, you know, good at what they do. And then you may not find that teacher to be in that category. I think what it boils down is you're going to target, and this is a leadership thing, you're going to target the most amount of people when you have conviction and empathy. Those are like the two most important things, I think, with teaching is conviction, and that's like passion for what you're doing, and you believe in what you're doing, and you know that you're doing the right thing. And then empathy, not just in the sense of like being empathetic with like negatives, but just like an understanding of where the kid's current situation is. That's like when I'm at wrestling practice. One thing I started doing is started wrestling during practice, and I do the conditioning during practice, and I lift during practice because I want them to understand that when I'm barking out orders, you know, I'm just not some old guy who's calling them weak and lazy and slow. You know, I'm going through this too, so if I can do this, I know that I'm not demanding anything that's outside the realm of your capabilities because I'm doing it right now also. So if I'm beating you in sprints, that means you need to run harder or whatever. So I think that, you know, going into teaching or to any aspect of leadership, I think that as long as you're understanding, you're probably going to be more effective. Where I think that where people become ineffective is when they stop, you know, like Jared said, they stop finding their why, and they're not as connected, and they're distant from the students or the clients or the co-workers or the colleagues or whatever, where they just get so far away from that, and they're no longer trying to empathize or understand what other people are going through or what other people need. It's just they're kind of maybe focused on themselves. I don't really know why they get away from that. Maybe it's the monotony. I'm not sure.
It's scary because teachers are arguably, I'm going to say arguably because everybody's always got a nitpick, right? But I think that's the most important profession in society because they literally shape who is going to do. And it's like when you stop thinking about here and now and start thinking about generational success and wellness, teachers are core to that, right? And they are like the most underpaid profession in the country, probably the world. I'm sure there's some places they're paid appropriately, but so you have driven people with potential for high success. Unless they have a very solid why very early in life and they want to be a teacher for one reason or another, those people are going to do what? Lawyer, doctor, because that's where the money is.
Absolutely.
Not that there's not obviously we need doctors and lawyers, you know, we need them too. But if you want to make money and do something at a high level, you're gonna go something of similar path. It's so upside down because that's not the case with teachers. So unless they have, it should be, absolutely should be. But nobody, the country, most of the world does not think in terms of generational success. We aren't doing the things to attract people other than incredibly driven people because you have to really believe in what you're doing to want to be a teacher, honestly, because you're not making any money. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of people that are just in it for the summers off, right? Mm-hmm. You know, but.
Yeah, you can't get by on conviction alone, though,
no,
and be the most effective. Because, and I talked to one of my college professors one time. Her name was Professor Senzo, and she had me for a math class. What was the course? I want to say it was, I think it was Fundamentals of Math. And it sounds like a very, very simple course. But
Are you talking about like the actual foundation of like the things that brought math to be math kind of?
A little bit of it was historical context. Yeah, we went into different numbering systems. So we had to do like operations with like base 9,
Isn't
base
that
8,
fun?
base 7. And it was difficult. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds for sure.
Well, that allows you to learn how people learn number systems because you're so familiar with base 10.
Mm-hmm.
I was a math major for quite a while, so I definitely understand that.
Her and I were talking the one day when she found out that I was, an education major, and we talked about how the one thing that you need to do in order to, further help along public education, and which will then ultimately affect all of society, is make it more competitive. So how do you make teaching more competitive? I know that they say that there's budget cuts and there's a lack of jobs. Listen, a couple of years ago when I graduated college, I had a job within a week of teaching. So it's not like it's that hyper competitive where jobs are at a premium. You can get an education job. And she said that one thing we need to do is allocate a lot more money and a lot higher salaries to those positions, because it's almost a foregone conclusion that if someone is an intelligent person, there's almost like a premeditated, mentality where I have to do something that is using that gift of intelligence. So like I have to be an engineer, I have to be a doctor, I have to be a lawyer, because number one is those are highly regarded as intellectual people, but then also they're compensated as such, so they make a lot of money. Whereas it's almost looked at as you doing yourself a disservice if you waste your talents being a teacher. And I say that because I was told that one time that someone at one point in my life told me that I was far too intelligent to be a teacher. And
that's rough.
What they were mentioning was that you're not making enough money to be rewarded for what you're bringing to the table, which I appreciated the compliment. But at the same time, you would think that like if you're a highly intellectual person, you should be teaching. That's one of the things that you should do. And
welcome to capitalism.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's money directly attached to everything STEM. Almost everything. I mean, research scientists may or may not make money unless you're working for a drug company, right? But like they're in a capitalist society, the motivation is the dollar, and the dollar is attached to things that produce, right?
Yep.
So, and that doubles back to like there's no generational thinking at all. Nobody cares what. I'm not saying nobody cares, because obviously I care what my daughter's world is going to be. But as a large society, as a country, as a world, nobody gives a flip and fiddle filth about what happens tomorrow. It's all about what can I do now, exactly right now. Nobody thinks about that down the road.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I would say
because if they were, a starting teacher salary would be $110K a year.
Right. Well, that's I think that's the one positive that might come out of this pandemic is people will have more respect for our kids' teachers.
It happened to me personally where when our kids were home, so before the pandemic really hit in March, I had a lot of issues in my class, like I do every year, and it's not me specific, it's every teacher in America, or probably every teacher in the world. We have certain kids that, aren't putting forth as much effort as you would like, or their behavior isn't like ideal, or whatever. I always try to get out in front of the problem and kind of like do a lot of communication with parents and get ahead of these issues before they become larger issues. And inevitably, parents are dismissive of that. They don't want to hear that their beautiful angels misbehaving in class because they don't believe it, or that they lied, or that they, failed a test or whatever. And I'm always a very self-reflective person, so I always try to point the finger back at myself. Okay, there's something that you're not doing from a behavior management standpoint in class. That's why that kid's acting up, or you didn't teach the content well enough. That's why these people failed, or whatever. But going back to that, we had a lot of parents that were very dismissive of the concerns that we brought to the table and almost would turn it around on us, which I'm okay doing, but then I also get a little bit defensive when you do that. Regardless, whenever the pandemic hit and kids were forced to be at home the entire day and their parents kind of shouldered a little bit of the burden as far as the instruction goes, I had multiple parents call me on a very frequent basis. Like they would just call me to reiterate, like, I give you so much credit for working with so-and-so because I didn't realize how hard it was to keep them focused, how difficult it is for them to put forth sustained effort into their homework or whatever it was. And I would have that all the time and I had parents flat out say, I've gained so much more respect for what you do for my kid now that I'm home with them trying to do this. And it makes you wonder, like, how did you not recognize this before when you were with your kid for 10 years? But I guess in a non-academic scenario, it really wouldn't manifest itself, at least to the degree that it did during the pandemic. So I had a lot of teachers that said they I don't know if the respect is the right word, but they have a little bit more empathy with their kids' teachers.
And that was a thought in my head. Like, it's most people don't bother to be empathetic about anything. They just sit in their 30-second reactions and roll with it.
Right. And it's I guess my thought on that is kids spend more time at school than they do at home. Mm-hmm. For the most part, or with a babysitter, or with daycare.
Conscious time.
Right,
that's
conscious time. Okay, that's a good one. Where they're not zombied out in front of a TV in their bedroom, or playing video games,
or out,
or sleeping.
Yeah.
They're with their teachers. So, I really do think that once we get over this pandemic in this country, you're going to see.
If
we're going to get over it eventually, you're going to see teachers respected more in society. I hope that you see teachers respected more in society to the point where they are compensated adequately and appropriately. I think I would like to see, and this is, I don't know why I came up, why I think about this all the time, but I would like to see the people that need to be compensated adequately. Teachers, police officers, EMS, military, firefighters, nurses, all need to be paid more because they're the ones that are doing all the real work.
And I want to kind of deflect away from teachers because part of me has a little bit of humility with it when I look at it at surface value, because we do get holidays off. We do get weekends off. We get summers off. And then you're also probably one of the only jobs in the country, at least that comes to my mind, that is in a climate-controlled environment and still gets called off of work for inclement weather, even though you're inside. So I know that there are a ton of perks, and
I don't think that's
I'm not one of those people. Like during the summer, before my personal training really picked up over the last couple of years, I worked in an oil field. Now, I have so much more of an understanding of proper context as far as teachers go. It's a very, very difficult job emotionally and mentally. But when you do something so like labor intensive, like working in the oil field, I don't say teachers or teaching is difficult or it's hard anymore from that standpoint, because I've seen the other side of it, what true, quote, hard work is. So I would even deflect away from teaching and give the people like the first responders, police officers, EMS people that you mentioned. I think that's, discussion to even a higher degree of people deserving, better compensation than they get. And I feel like you could have this argument with so many different professions because every profession is necessary almost.
Yeah,
I don't mean to knock your rainbow out of the sky, but what you're describing is happening to teachers and in healthcare as well, because they're on the front line of that particular battle, right? Because teachers are having to deal with a whole bunch of crazy stuff, like either they're in school and they're dealing with kids in masks and the risks, or they're trying to do something that nobody was prepared for and go full remote, or a combination too. I'm sure there are teachers that have kids in and out and having to do both, and like the parents gaining respect and all that stuff. Look at what happened to firefighters after 9/11. Look how much support there was. Look how much funding there was. Now look how much there is now. We've gone right back to where we were, maybe even less to where we were.
Yeah.
You get all that support, this huge influx, and thank you, we appreciate you, and then it just right back to baseline.
I mean, it takes tragedy for people to realize what they are taking advantage of.
Right, but the utopia you're realizing probably will happen, and it'll be nice for a while, but it's going to go away, and we're going to go right back to not caring about something until we need it again. Yeah,
because we live in a society that lives in the knee jerk.
Yep.
We live in a society that is reactionary instead of trying to get out in front of it.
And people like to think that low chances mean no chance, and they're perfectly comfortable rolling the dice with the pandemic, with insurance. I'm not going to wreck my car. Why do I need to pay for the fire department? I've never called it my whole life.
Right.
I never used the fire department. Why am I paying property tax?
Right.
People get lost in that, and it's sad and destructive, and it's a huge problem. And I think that the problem is also that as a society, we don't have any real big problems.
Right.
It's interesting that you say that, because I've talked with several people about this in the past is right now the big thing being pushed, whether it's media influence or whatever, is how awful our world is and how terrible it is. And, speaking, really what they're talking about is the United States, because I think that most people's worldview is completely non-existent. Like they have no clue what's going on.
It's crazy because I work in a global environment. Like my team of 8 or so people, London, Chennai, India, Pittsburgh, New Jersey, and then there's people that I talk to that work all over the world. Mm-hmm. Like the bank that I work for is everywhere. They are like the most globally systemic important bank. They're everywhere. And like, then I'm here in St. Clair Township, and there are people that are so hyper focused right here. Yep. And it's like, and they have these opinions that are based they're trying to cast against the country or the world, and they only ever see this much.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to talk about the state of society or state of the world, that we live in a time as crazy as 2020's been, and as much as people like to throw out there that this is like the worst year ever, this is the most peaceful and civilized that our society has ever been up until this point throughout history.
Right.
There's no longer public hangings and beheadings, and we're not in the middle of a war, at least like, an actual physical war with to some degree, yeah.
People would get over themselves if that's what was going on. That was kind of my point. When you think about World War I, World War II, things get out of control when there's not a problem to work toward together.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely changed over the years, and I don't think that our society is like that. Like I said, it's very peaceful and it's very civilized compared to what it was 100, 200, 300, 400,000 years ago. Like not even comparable.
Yeah, to hear people complain about living in the United States, it just drives me crazy, because like you could live in a communist nation where you don't have a choice.
Well, the problem is that when you live in a place that gives you the freedom to complain, it's because you have the freedom.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Comedic irony there, I think.
Right.
Well, guys, we've been on this episode for quite a while now. Went down a lot of different avenues and different paths with some things. I feel like, we touched on a little bit of leadership. We touched on goal setting. We talked on some larger societal issues, and pretty much everything in between, time management. Like I'm just looking over my notes and feel like we covered a lot, which I hopefully, this will be beneficial to people.
I forgot that we were on a podcast. I started to feel like those old guys at McDonald's having coffee solving the world's problems.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that we're on our way to solving every world issue. We just got to do it one episode at a time.
Yeah, one episode at a time.
So, Jared, thanks for coming back on. I feel like every guest we have on, we always make this, kind of a gesture like, hey, we'd like to have you back on and talk about this sort of thing. And with the exception of Shannon, who was back-to-back episodes because we needed to finish her story because it was so like long and convoluted and intense. You're the first guest, like we mentioned to start the show, that we've ever had back on a second time. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess there's no cookie cutter end of interview questions for the second time, or
I didn't come up with a second set of questions. I just thought about that too.
It's a very good question. That question in and of itself is a good question. We have to come up with something for our second interviews.
The opposite
of feel like, okay, so we asked you before, do you feel like you're still chasing your dreams today? Because you alluded to it a little bit earlier in the very, very beginning. So do you feel like you still are chasing your dreams today? And has your vision of dream chasing changed?
I don't think that my vision's changed, but certainly I'll say that the variables are probably speed, right? Because there are some things that I've gotten better at. There are some things that I've definitely laxed at, and there are some things that because I got better at them, other things have failed, right? So I think that just like we mentioned earlier, as long as you keep focus on your why and your dream, and you keep moving in that direction, even though one step forward and 2 steps back, you still took that 1 step forward. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I like that.
Cool. Well, good conversation as always, gentlemen. Yes, and we'll look forward to having you back a third time. We'll put it out there into the universe, so hopefully it manifests itself eventually down the road. So with that, we have come to the end of another episode of the Chasing Dreams podcast. This has been episode 56 with Charlie, Justin, and Jared. We appreciate your listenership, and we hope to speak to you guys soon.
Unbreakable, unstoppable, I'm pushed to the edge and